Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. When my husband Daniel Reed saw the official transfer letter on the table, the one allowing him to return to the capital, his restrained yet thrilled expression told me everything. He had been reborn. Just like in our previous life, the letter said he could bring his whole family back to the capital, and that a job would be arranged for his spouse. On the day the provincial office sent a car to pick him up, Daniel held our daughter Lily's hand with his left and the white dog's leash with his right. He comforted me gently, saying, "Lisa, the schools in the city are better. I'll take Lily with me so you don't have to worry. She's always loved the white dog, so I'll bring it too. You know, with the pandemic and everything, I really need to get back to the capital to develop my career. Once we're settled, I'll come back for you." Out of the 3 sentences he said, 2 mentioned the pandemic. Both of us knew what that really meant. Claire Hill, the true daughter of the Hill family who had been separated from them for years, was the pandemic he referred to. Daniel was eager to get rid of me so he could marry Claire Hill. But what he didn't know was that I too had been reborn. This time I wouldn't wait for him in vain, nor would I take my own life for him. So when I heard his words, I only replied coldly, "Fine, take whoever you want back to the capital. I still have vegetables to pick and chickens to feed. We'll talk about the rest later." When the mailman rushed into my yard, waving a letter from the provincial office, I was still crouched by the well-washing clothes. "Lisa, quick, call Mr. Reed. The provincial letter's finally here." Without looking up, I said flatly, "I can't leave right now. Go to the school and tell him yourself." I knew what that letter meant. Daniel Reed would soon leave this little mountain village with Claire Hill. The news spread quickly. Even when I went to the field to cut vegetables, Mrs. Brown from the next plot called out sourly, "You sure are lucky. About to move back to the city with Mr. Reed and become a city lady, and you're still cutting vegetables and feeding chickens." In my last life he hadn't taken me with him. I knew he wouldn't this time either. Back then I thought I'd never leave this place again. Daniel spent his days teaching and his nights drinking to drown his sorrows. He often came to my small shop to buy marinated snacks to go with his liquor. One night he got so drunk he passed out in front of my store. It was the middle of winter, freezing cold, and I was afraid he'd freeze to death. Out of kindness, I dragged him inside and let him sleep there for the night. The next day the entire village was gossiping about us. He figured his reputation was already ruined, so he gave up fighting it and married me. Our wedding was so simple it was almost pitiful. Just the 2 of us eating bowls of chicken noodle soup with red eggs. The chicken was one-eyed, raised and butchered myself. In this life I only wished never to have anything more to do with Daniel Reed. I smiled back at Mrs. Brown and said, "The more chickens you raise, the more eggs you get. I can't just stop now. I'll bring you some braised chicken later. If I raised enough chickens and sold enough eggs, maybe I could save up enough money to leave this place someday." With that thought, I worked even harder in the field. When I got home, Claire Hill was dropping Lily off from school. The white dog in the yard ran joyfully to greet Lily, barking and wagging its tail. Lily tugged on Claire's sleeve, begging her to stay and teach her to paint and make crafts. Claire smiled sweetly and patted Lily's head. "You're such a good learner, Lily." Lily clung to her arm, afraid she might refuse. "You're amazing, Claire. You can do everything. Mommy only knows how to feed chickens." Claire looked at me as I walked through the door and smiled softly. "All right, Lily. Whatever you want to learn, learn. Aunt Claire will teach you." Then Daniel Reed came home, his white shirt spotless, gold-rimmed glasses gleaming, his eyes full of gentle affection as he watched Claire and Lily drawing together. That tender gaze, he had never once given it to me. Claire Hill had been found by the Miller couple from our village when she was only 3 years old. They discovered her during a trip to the city. She'd been dressed in fine clothes, clearly from a wealthy family, just lost. The Millers raised her with great care, always putting her needs first. They even sent her to study in town and later to college. After graduating, she returned to the village as a volunteer teacher. What no one else knew was that she already had a placement letter from the provincial capital. Once she completed 5 years of volunteer teaching, she could settle there permanently. She was like a pure, flawless white flower, the bright, untouchable light in Daniel Reed's heart. It was just a pity that when she returned to the village to teach, Daniel Reed was already married to me. Lily was already 3 years old when Daniel told me, "Claire likes your white cut chicken. Go make some for her. The chicken has to be freshly slaughtered. Claire doesn't eat anything that isn't fresh." He repeated the instruction twice to make sure I understood. In my previous life, I'd lost my temper at that. I'd said, "Daniel, don't we have some in the shop already? Why do I have to kill another chicken? I was saving those to sell during Christmas to make some money." Back then, all I wanted was to save enough so Lily could attend school in the city. But Daniel had just looked at me with that expression, impatient, unwilling to waste another word, and then turned to Claire to apologize. "Sorry, Claire. You must think this is embarrassing. Let's just eat out my treat." I was furious. So righteous of him, pretending to be above it all. As if the small salary he earned from teaching could ever cover our expenses. Who did he think paid for everything? It was me. Feeding the chickens, slaughtering them, cooking them, selling them, keeping our whole household afloat. Then Lily, hands on her hips, pouted and said, "Mommy, if you don't make dinner for Aunt Claire, I won't eat at home either." Claire crouched down beside her, pretending to scold gently. "Lily, that's not how you talk to your mom. That's rude." She pulled Lily into her arms and rubbed her hair affectionately. Lily fiddled with her fingers and mumbled, "I'm sorry, Aunt Claire." But the one who really deserved an apology was me. I stood there watching as Claire and Daniel each took one of Lily's hands and walked out together, the white dog trotting happily behind them. In that moment they looked like the real family of three, and I was nothing but an outsider. No wonder that when Daniel later brought Claire back to the capital and arranged for her position, no one questioned their relationship. Even the white dog had already accepted her. Claire was fair-skinned and delicate. Lily often said she smelled nice. I, on the other hand, spent my days farming, picking vegetables, and feeding chickens. Hard labor had thickened my frame and roughened my hands. I could never compare to Claire's slender, graceful youth. I would never forget the night Lily refused to sleep in my bed. She had said, "Mommy, you always smell like chicken poop or cooking spices. I don't want to sleep with you. I wish Aunt Claire were my mom. She smells good." That was my daughter, the child I had carried for 10 months and nearly bled to death giving birth to. In this life, if Lily wanted to recognize someone else as her mother, that was fine by me. It had nothing to do with me anymore. So, I nodded gently and responded to Daniel's order about the chicken without complaint. He seemed a little surprised that I wasn't arguing, but I didn't say another word. I simply walked out of the room, went into the chicken coop, and made a show of shooing the hens around. Then I returned to the shop, took one of the white-cut chickens I'd made the night before, reheated it, and placed it on the table. Claire wouldn't know the difference anyway. She couldn't tell whether it was freshly slaughtered or not. Her eyes were always on Daniel, and as long as he was there, it didn't matter what she ate. I couldn't bring myself to eat with them. I told Daniel, "I'll go gather some eggs." Maybe out of guilt from our past life, Daniel asked, "Why aren't you eating with us?" "I want to get to town before dark," I said calmly. "I can sell the eggs and earn a little money." The moment I mentioned money, Daniel's face darkened, his brows tightening. He didn't want to hear another word. His eyes were filled with disdain, as if my talk of money made me unworthy of him. That pride of his, the self-importance of a man who thought himself above the rest, was on full display. But the truth was he loved money too. Otherwise, in our past life, why would he have quit his job and rushed to marry into the Hill family the moment he learned Claire was their real daughter? I still remembered that day in our last life when Daniel was leaving for the capital with Lily and the white dog. I had gathered as many eggs as I could find, filled a bucket with them, and insisted he take it before he left. With so many villagers watching, he had no choice but to accept. I'd only wanted Lily to have something nutritious to eat. But the next day, on my way to town to sell marinated chicken, I saw that same bucket in the ditch by the village entrance, filled with broken eggs, reeking, swarmed by flies. Of course, what did people in the capital need with farm eggs? They had everything. From that moment on, I decided the eggs I gathered would never again be for Lily. The money from selling eggs or chickens I would never hand over to Daniel Reed again. When I returned home, I quietly cleaned up the table littered with chicken bones. Just as I was about to take the dishes to the well to wash, Daniel said, "I'm leaving soon. I've had a telephone installed in the house. When you miss Lily, just call us," Daniel said. I nodded and went to wash the dishes. Maybe in this life, Daniel thought that installing a telephone at home would ease his guilt a little. But the money he used to buy that phone had come from the small savings I'd made. Every cent earned from selling marinated chicken bit by bit. In my previous life I had been touched, thinking that he still cared about me deep down. I didn't even mind that it was my money used to install that phone line. At first I called almost every day, but each time Lily barely wanted to talk. After less than a minute, she'd say she had to take a bath, do her homework, or practice drawing. Later, it was always Claire who answered. She told me again and again to stop calling, saying that my calls distracted Lily from her schoolwork. Eventually, all I ever heard when I dialed was the busy tone. No one picked up anymore. I wanted to go to the capital to see Lily, to know if she was doing well. But I didn't even know their exact address. And besides, I had no money. The capital was too far away. Before Daniel left, he had promised to come back for me. I waited almost 10 years. He never came. It was then I finally realized I was nothing but a stain on his life. He was never going to return. Years later, when a nationwide population census was conducted, the authorities came to verify Lily's birth records and asked who her biological mother was. That was when I learned that Daniel Reed and Claire Hill had long since married. Claire had been taken back by her wealthy birth family as their legitimate daughter, and Daniel had become the son-in-law of that powerful household. But for some reason, they never had any more children. When I saw Lily as a grown woman, raised with the grace and elegance of a real Aries, I called softly, "Lily, I'm your mother." She stepped back immediately, hiding behind Claire. "You're not my mom," she said coldly. "You're ugly." My heart shattered into pieces. Someone handed me a form to sign. When I saw Lily hesitate, I said, "You don't know how to write yet. Let me sign for you." "I don't need your help," she said. "I know how to write my name." I stood there frozen, trembling at the gate of that mansion, like some distant, impoverished relative begging for acknowledgement. My hand shook as I signed my name on the paper. In that moment I felt a strange kind of relief. I was thankful that Daniel and I had never officially registered our marriage. Otherwise, I would have had to sign a divorce agreement too. Years of labor had aged me quickly. My hair had turned gray, my back was bent, and my clothes were so faded from washing that the color was nearly gone. Standing beside the perfectly kept Claire Hill, I felt a deep cutting shame. Every bit of hope I'd ever held in life crumbled in that instant. So I chose to end it. I jumped from a tall building, ending everything once and for all. Perhaps heaven took pity on me because when I opened my eyes again, I was back on the eve of Daniel Reed's transfer to the capital. This time, I no longer felt moved by that telephone line he'd installed. In this life, I wanted only to live for myself. I realized that I had no real ties anymore, neither husband nor daughter. They weren't mine. I no longer obsessed over making Lily her favorite dishes, nor over saving eggs for Daniel. In the small kitchen, I fried crispy chicken, the aroma spreading through the air. Claire Hill frowned and said gently, "Fried food isn't good for you. You should stop making it." Lily ran over, curious. I didn't look up, just focused on frying the chicken. I answered calmly. "I know these are for Aunt Jang," Lily said after a moment, a puzzled look on her face. "Her grandson loves it," I replied. "I promised to make some for him." In the past, whenever I made something delicious, I always saved it for Lily or brought it to Daniel's school. But this time I hadn't saved any for her. And oddly, that seemed to upset her. She pouted. "Aunt Jang's grandson doesn't even like studying, and he's so greedy. Why are you making food for him?" I didn't hide my answer this time. "Because I like him," I said simply. "I fry food for whoever I like. Aunt Jang is my neighbor. She sometimes gives me vegetables she doesn't eat so I can feed the chickens and the dog. I'm grateful for that. I've lived next to her for years, and since I'm leaving soon, I should give her something in return." Her grandson grew up before my eyes. He's a lively little boy. Every time he sees me, he asks for a hug. He doesn't mind the smell of chicken on me. He always says I smell like food. How strange, I thought. Others thought I smelled fragrant. Yet in Daniel's and Claire's eyes, all they could smell on me was filth and chicken droppings. Lily crossed her arms and huffed. "Fine, I'll ask Aunt Claire to take me to KFC. I don't want your fried chicken." KFC, that word. The first time I ever heard those 3 letters in my past life. I was so nervous that day, terrified that Claire was taking Lily to see some doctor named Dr. Yang. I was afraid the doctor would give Lily an injection. She'd always been terrified of needles. I made a scene insisting they not go. Daniel, with his scholar's arrogance, didn't even bother arguing with me. But that look of disdain on his face is something I'll never forget. All my protests back then came from one thing, fear. Fear that I was about to lose Lily. Yet in Daniel's eyes, I was just a hysterical, ignorant woman from the countryside, jealous of Claire for no reason. Of course, Lily ran straight to tell him everything. Daniel never stepped foot into the kitchen, but that day he stood in the doorway to talk to me. I ignored him. Then one night, Claire fell ill and said she wanted some herbal tea. I saw Daniel crouched by the stove in the middle of the night, carefully fanning the coals and tending to the pot as if brewing a rare medicine. Watching him gently stir in sugar and test the temperature over and over, I realized for the first time he actually could enter the kitchen. "Lisa, what are you quarreling with Lily for?" he said later. "She's just a child. Why take it so seriously? We're leaving this afternoon. Don't you want to leave her with a happy memory?" A happy memory? I couldn't think of a single one. Not in my last life, not in this one. My entire life so far had been nothing but endless chores, endless eggs, a husband who never loved me, and a daughter who wished someone else were her mother. "There's still some money left in the shop," I told him quietly. He nodded. "I'll take it with me. There'll be a lot of expenses in the capital. Don't worry, I'll send you money regularly." So that was why he'd come, not to stand up for Lily, but to take my money. I couldn't help the contempt that rose in my chest. He knew perfectly well that in 6 months he'd be marrying into Claire's wealthy family, yet he still couldn't bear to live even half a year of hardship. "You know the value of money just fine," I said coldly. "So why do you always get angry whenever I talk about it?" For once, Daniel's face flushed red with embarrassment. "I've got nothing more to say to you," he snapped. I thought to myself, the long robe of a self-righteous scholar is easy to wear, but impossible to take off. Sometimes I still think, if only that snowy night years ago, I hadn't brought Daniel into my house, maybe everything would have been different. By the afternoon, the car sent by the provincial office arrived at our door. Half the village crowded around to watch, practically trampling the threshold of my home. Before getting in, Daniel turned and looked at me for a brief moment. Then he took out a fountain pen and handed it to me. It was the pen I had once loved dearly, so much that I'd once asked him for it. Of course he'd refused. "You can't even read or write," he'd said back then. "What would you do with it?" "I can read," I'd argued. But no matter what I said, he never believed me. Finally, he'd ended the discussion with a condescending smile. "Be good. You spend all day feeding and butchering chickens. Giving you a pen would be a waste." And now, right before leaving, he'd suddenly decided to give me that pen. But this time I didn't even reach out to take it. I didn't want to say a single word. Daniel awkwardly pulled the pen back, muttering, "Still mad?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm telling the truth." Maybe my quiet tone eased his conscience a little, made him feel less embarrassed in front of the villagers. He sighed and said, almost as if doing me a favor, "All right, then give me the things." "What things?" I asked blankly. "The bucket of eggs," he said. Of course he was reborn too. He remembered everything. In our past life, I had insisted he take a bucket full of eggs with him before getting into the car. After much refusal, he had finally given in to my tears and accepted it. Now I understood the tone in his voice. It was the same self-righteous pity. He thought that by taking my gift, he was doing me a kindness, giving me peace of mind. How laughable. "There are no eggs," I said flatly. "I sold them in town." Daniel froze, maybe remembering the woman from his past life, Lisa, whose eyes had once been full of him. And now that same woman was calm, distant, and indifferent. Claire rolled down the car window and Lily poked her head out, waving cheerfully. "Bye-bye." The sun was setting, the sky tinged with red. Daniel looked at me one last time, then got into the car and shut the door. No one said goodbye to me. Good. I didn't want to say goodbye either. I turned back toward the house, thinking only that before it got dark, I needed to finish butchering the rest of the chickens. That way I would have saved up enough money. I packed light. There was nothing at home worth clinging to. The first time I took a train, everything felt so new. I met many people along the way and they were all kind. I boarded a southbound train with the evening wind smelling of freedom. Daniel Reed moved into the faculty dormitory at the school with Claire Hill and Lily. The dorm wasn't new, but it had a scholarly atmosphere. There were even a few books stacked in the hallway corners. The three of them were exhausted from the trip. By the time they arrived, the cafeteria had already closed. Claire didn't know how to cook, so Daniel had to borrow some dried noodles and eggs from a neighbor and throw something together to make do. The first to complain was Lily. "Dad, the noodles you cooked are terrible. I want KFC." Claire kept a polite smile and soothed her. "Okay, Aunt Claire will take you tomorrow." "No, I don't want that. These noodles are awful. I want KFC now." Daniel, sweating from standing over the hot pot, was annoyed to be criticized. "You'll eat what I cook. All you ever think about is KFC. Do you know how expensive that is?" He regretted the argument he'd had with me. He regretted not taking the money from the shop. Now things were awkward. He remembered the days at home when I washed and dressed him, handed him food. Now he felt uneasy. Claire was the true Aries. She didn't know how to do anything around the house, and he dared not have her do chores. He told himself, endure for 6 more months. Then once Claire was acknowledged as the eyes, everything would turn around. That night, Lily's stomach started to rumble. Daniel couldn't wake Claire or his sister. He remembered how back in the mountain village, no matter how late it was, if Lily was hungry, her mother would always get up to make something. Thinking of that made him miss his mother a little. Time flew. After arriving in Canton, my good cooking skills helped me get a job at a tea restaurant. In the kitchen, the chicken I made, no matter how I prepared it, became a signature dish. Demand outstripped supply, and I was busy from morning until night. Sometimes I thought of Lily up north and wondered if the house phone would ring. Besides working at the tea house, I was often hired to cook for banquets. In my last life, I stayed on our small patch of land and never left. This time, I was determined to treat myself better. I saved part of what I earned and invested part in myself lessons, fitness. I didn't skip them. I even bought myself a cell phone. Aunt Jang from the village, one of the first to have a phone line, would call me sometimes during the slack season. Usually I'd hang up on him and then call back so he'd save on phone charges. One day he told me he'd been hearing our home phone ring at night lately. The countryside nights are quiet except for cicadas and dogs, so a phone ringing sounds sharp and strange. He didn't know who was calling. Maybe Lily, but he was sure it wasn't Daniel. In our previous life, every time I rang his house, even though he was right there, he never came over to say a single word to me. How I had wished to get a call from him even once. I asked Aunt Jang a favor. "The breaker is by the chicken coop. Can you go and switch it off for me?" He didn't understand at first but nodded in agreement. Daniel gradually settled into a routine. He still taught during the day, but at home everything was a mess. Claire did nothing. She just waited for Daniel to bring back food from the cafeteria. At night, after finishing his lessons and settling Lily down, Daniel Reed still had to wash the dishes and do the laundry. At first he did it willingly, even thinking it was nothing. But as time passed, resentment began to creep in. He started to think of me, how I used to do everything around the house so naturally. He would pause at the sink trying to remember exactly how much detergent I used, or how I used to fold the clothes after drying them. All those small ordinary details of daily life slowly piled up like a heavy stone on his chest, pressing the breath out of him. Whenever Daniel mentioned sharing chores, Claire Hill's eyes would narrow. She would remind him in that fragile voice of hers that she had given up her city registration and career in the provincial capital just to be with him. Even the white dog, too much trouble to care for, had been given away. Daniel told himself he could endure it. After all, this was the price of marrying into wealth later. But missing someone was harder to suppress than hunger, especially when Lily told him she hadn't been able to reach me for a long time. Actually, not even once. One morning after Claire scolded Lily for eating too messily, Lily finally broke down crying. "I want mommy. I want mommy," she sobbed. "Stop crying," Claire said coldly. "You need to deal with your own problems." For the 108th time, she refused Lily's request to call me. The crying got so loud that Daniel had to leave his classroom mid-lecture to come home. Seeing Lily's tear-streaked face, he had no choice but to promise her that he would take some time off soon to visit the mountain village. "But you can't tell Aunt Claire," he warned. Lily nodded obediently through her tears, finally quieting down. That night, Daniel lay awake, recalling trivial things he'd once dismissed. The way my chicken always turned out so tender and flavorful. The fresh vegetables I picked every day. The wild mushrooms and mountain herbs I'd bring home in season. Suddenly, he couldn't stomach another cafeteria meal. He remembered how I always hand-washed his white shirts no matter how busy or tired I was, even learning how to press them the way city people did. His shirts were always spotless white, but my rain boots were always covered in dirt. For the first time in years, Daniel realized that I had been vivid, alive, full of the scent and rhythm of real life. He remembered when we first got married. I had been a lively, bright young woman, no less beautiful than Claire Hill. He also remembered the arguments, how I had to spend money on formula because Lily was growing fast and we couldn't afford to feed her otherwise. How I learned to bargain fiercely for a few cents just to stretch our budget. Daniel had always found that embarrassing. To him, my hustle was vulgar, unrefined. He thought himself above such things, too cultured, too noble for money talk. But I knew better. How could a mere school teacher's salary, barely enough for a few vegetables and rice, possibly feed a whole family? Daniel had also once said, I wasn't educated enough to teach Lily properly. Meanwhile, a new young teacher had arrived at his school, educated, graceful, beautiful. When Claire came along, she was like a spring breeze that swept open the door to his heart. But that breeze was a wildfire too. Once it caught, it burned everything else down. The next morning, Daniel made up his mind. He'd take a few days off and bring Lily back to the mountain village to see how I was doing without him. By the time they reached the familiar entrance to the village, night had already fallen. The small house at the corner was dark and empty. No sound was coming from inside. Daniel didn't even hear the chickens. In the past, he thought the chickens were noisy, filthy things. Now the silence felt suffocating. Something was wrong. Why is it different from before? He murmured. By now, I should have been raising even more chickens. Probably dozens. Why isn't Mommy home? Lily whispered, her voice trembling in the dark. Daniel shook his head. Maybe she just stepped out, he said, though a flicker of unease passed through him. His mind flashed back to the last few days before he'd left. I had seemed strange, quiet, unlike myself. In the 8 years we'd been together, I had never left that small village. Except once, that one time I'd stormed out after a terrible argument about Claire. I had run into the western hills alone and cried until my chest ached. But as the sun began to set, I had thought of Lily, of her going hungry that night, and wiped my tears, heading home. When I'd returned, Daniel had been sitting comfortably in a rattan chair, reading, completely unconcerned. He hadn't worried where I'd gone or whether something might have happened to me. He didn't even care that I'd been crying. And that, I realized, was Daniel Reed then and now. This time, Daniel Reed finally began to panic. The mountain village was chilly at night. Let's go ask Aunt Jang, he said. Lily pouted, clearly unwilling, but followed him anyway. Daniel felt awkward the whole way there. Back when we lived in the village, he had always hated dealing with the locals, said they were too simple, too nosy, too far beneath him. Aunt Jang's door opened just a crack. Only after confirming several times that it was really him did she finally let him and Lily in. Lisa? Oh, she left long ago, Aunt Jang said matter-of-factly. The same night you two did. Everyone thought she'd gone to find you. Daniel's face froze with embarrassment. Do you know where she went? I tried calling the house phone, but no one answers. Aunt Jang patted her chest. Oh, that's because I cut the line. The ringing kept going off every night. It scared my husband, and his heart isn't good. Anyway, aren't you living with that Hill woman now? What are you still worrying about Lisa for? Aunt Jang and I spoke on the phone occasionally, though I never once mentioned Claire Hill, but she had sharp eyes, and after years of living at the edge of the village, she'd already seen enough to know what had really been going on. This time she decided to speak up for me. Her words struck Daniel like a slap, but he still pressed on. Do you know where she went? Aunt Jang sighed, softening when she looked at Lily. All I know is Lisa went south to Canton. I don't know where exactly. Does she have a phone number? Aunt Jang, being the honest woman she was, took out a slip of paper and gave him my cell phone number. Daniel hadn't planned to stay the night. He hadn't even brought a house key since he never expected to come back. But it was already late, so out of kindness for Lily, Aunt Jang offered them a place to stay. That night, Daniel lay in the small guest room, listening to the chirping of crickets and the occasional barking of dogs. The earthy smell of the countryside seeped through the window. For the first time in a long while, both he and Lily slept soundly. The next morning, Daniel dialed my number. "Lisa, it's me." He hesitated, his voice unsteady. "Lily and we miss you." Then he added softly, "I really do." I froze when I heard his voice and then hung up with a sharp click. Afterward, I stared at my phone for a moment, then calmly blocked his number. By that time, it had been nearly 6 months since I'd left the village. Based on how things had unfolded in my previous life, this was about when Claire Hill would have been officially recognized and welcomed back into the Hill family as their legitimate daughter. Meanwhile, I was signing a lease for my own restaurant. Encouraged by my colleagues and friends, I had decided to open a tea restaurant of my own. I hadn't forgotten my old boss's kindness. So, even though I was starting my own business, I still supplied marinated chicken to his restaurant chain. That gratitude and reliability built me a good reputation in Canton's restaurant district, helping me stand firm on my own feet. 2 weeks later, my tea restaurant officially opened, Cloud Tower. The day we unveiled the signboard, I stood beneath it and felt for the first time that I truly belonged somewhere. It didn't take long for Cloud Tower to become a must-visit restaurant in the city. I no longer had to labor from dawn to dusk. Life finally slowed down. Perhaps happiness really does make people glow. I found myself looking better, younger even. There were even a few wealthy businessmen who began courting me, but I turned them all down. Then one day, my manager told me that a famous Cantonese businessman named Mr. Chu wanted to book a private dining room. Unfortunately, every room was already full. "Should we open the top VIP suite for them?" the manager asked. My heart skipped a beat. The Chu family, Claire's family. Still, business was business. If they can afford it, why not? I said. "Tell them our main restaurant's top VIP room has a minimum spend of 38,000 yuan. Ask if they're okay with that." I did a quick calculation. By now, Daniel Reed had likely become the Hill family's son-in-law, a member of their household in name, if not in pride. Not long after, the manager returned, beaming. The Chu family agreed without hesitation. "They've booked it." The next day, I received a call from the Canton Tourism Bureau. They wanted to discuss a potential partnership and have me serve as a cultural ambassador for the city's food and travel campaign. The meeting was arranged at the same restaurant on the top floor in another VIP suite. When the elevator doors opened, I saw them, the Hill family, in all their finery, and beside them Daniel Reed. He looked almost unrecognizable, shoulders slumped, his movements cautious and ingratiating. The proud teacher I once knew now hovered behind the family, smiling obsequiously, carrying handbags and coats. I didn't need to ask to know. He wasn't living the dream he'd once imagined. "Mommy, it was Lily who spotted me first." Her voice carried across the hall. I smiled gently and said, "You've mistaken me for someone else." Claire Hill's eyes went wide. She stared at me, frozen in place, disbelief written all over her face. Daniel turned slightly, bowing his head. "You didn't dare meet my eyes." After a long silence, his voice came, small, trembling, full of shame. "Lisa, what are you doing here?" The officials from the Tourism Bureau glanced at the Hill family, and then turned to me. "Miss Lin," one of them asked politely, "do you know them?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, I don't." When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out first, gracefully, leading the bureau officials toward the private dining suite. Behind me, I could hear the Hill family patriarch's scolding tone. "Don't go trying to make random connections. That woman is the owner of Cloud Tower. People like us don't usually get to see her. Those with her are from the Tourism Bureau. They're here for official business." Daniel Reed stood there staring at my back. My posture, straight, confident, elegant, was nothing like the woman he remembered. Seeing the way he was looking at me, Claire Hill's anger flared. "What are you staring at? Don't forget, you're a member of the Hill family now. Don't you dare have thoughts you shouldn't. Otherwise, say goodbye to Lily's tuition and your mother's support money." A sharp slap cracked through the air. The sound made me instinctively turn my head. Daniel's demeanor changed instantly. He became the obedient, eager-to-please man I'd seen earlier, murmuring apologies and trying to soothe Claire. I couldn't help thinking that the scholar's long self-righteous robe had finally been stripped away. The meeting with the Tourism Bureau went extremely well. Our collaboration was confirmed, and Cloud Tower's reputation soared even higher. That night, wanting to record a few key details from the negotiation, I opened the security camera footage from the VIP floor. But when I accidentally clicked into the Hill's private room feed, the sight made me freeze. Daniel was kneeling beside Mr. Hill, holding a serving tray in both hands, bowing and serving food like a lowly waiter to the entire family. I immediately called my manager. Why wasn't there any waiter assigned to the Hill's private room today? The manager, sweating nervously, explained, Mr. Hill specifically refused service. He said he didn't like strangers around and wanted their own house servant, a tall, thin man with glasses, to help carry dishes from the kitchen. So that's what it was. Rich families and their rules. I wasn't about to argue, so I let it be. Still, I told the manager, contact their butler. We'll refund 15% of their service fee. If we didn't serve them, it's only fair we don't charge for it. A few days later, my manager called again. There's a man and a little girl here asking to see you. I hesitated for a moment, then said, all right, maybe it's time to say what should have been said long ago. I booked a small private room and asked for tea to be brought in. After preparing the tea, I waited quietly until Daniel and Lily arrived. Lily's face lit up the moment she saw me. Mommy, we finally found you. I smiled gently. Oh, what brings you two here? Lily lowered her head, looking hurt. Daddy and I went back to the village to find you, but Aunt Jang said you weren't there anymore. I was so sad, Mommy. Why didn't you want us anymore? I took a sip of tea and smiled faintly. Because you were the ones who didn't want me. Lily froze. She was older now, old enough to understand. Maybe she remembered that day, the car leaving, the window rolled up, how she hadn't even said goodbye. So, who abandoned who really? Lily burst into tears. Mommy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Her sobs came in gasping waves until she could barely breathe. I poured her a glass of water and pushed it toward her. She was still my child, the one I had raised, but my heart no longer softened. Some wounds from the past life never heal. This time it was my turn to be the one who left first. I asked the manager to take Lily next door to another private room to play while I spoke with Daniel alone. Lisa, Daniel said, his voice low, almost unfamiliar. You've changed. He looked at me with complicated eyes. Since I'd stopped doing farm work, my skin had regained its pale softness, and the earthy smell he used to despise was long gone, replaced by the faint fragrance of my perfume. There was no dirt under my nails now, only polished lacquer. I smiled calmly. You've changed too. He had grown thinner. The spark in his eyes dimmed. The white shirt he wore was the same kind he used to wear years ago, but now it no longer carried the quiet pride of a scholar. On him, it looked like a uniform, a servant's attire. I tapped my manicured nails lightly on the table beside a stack of documents. Your turn to sign. Then I added with a small, deliberate smile, don't worry. I know you can read. Daniel stared at the paper in disbelief. It was a legal document severing all ties between me and Lily. His lips trembled as he looked at me. Lisa, you're really back. I nodded, my tone even. Sign it. He stayed silent for a long time. Maybe weighed down by guilt from our past life. Guilt for everything he'd done to me and everything I'd lost because of him. This time fate repaid everything in full. Daniel Reed clenched his jaw and signed his name on the document. His voice trembled as he said, Lisa, I'm sorry. The words were painfully familiar. In my previous life, he had stood at the gates of the Hill family mansion, looking down on me with that same tone of superiority, saying the same words, I'm sorry. Back then, I had been like a stray dog abandoned in the cold, not even offered a cup of tea. But in this life I had done everything I could. At least this time I poured him tea before ending things. It's my fault, he said again, his eyes downcast. I nodded calmly. You're right. In both our lives, you were always the one who wronged me. He hesitated, voice cracking. Lisa, can we start over? I'll leave the Hill family. I won't be their live-in son-in-law anymore. His eyes lit up with a desperate, flickering hope as he looked at me. I met his gaze and shook my head. I don't need a servant. I knew Daniel too well. The only reason he'd shed his scholar's pride and given up his long robes was for money, and money was the one thing I no longer lacked. Now that my social standing was higher than his, he suddenly wanted to come back, thinking that if we were together again, I'd return to the woman I once was, the one who served him and Lily without complaint, the one who made his life comfortable and easy. He thought he could live off me again. Before I could speak further, the door burst open. Claire Hill stormed in, face twisted with rage, pointing her finger straight at Daniel. I knew it. You came back here for her. And you, she turned on me, her voice shrill. You shameless woman trying to seduce my husband again. She slammed a pair of red marriage certificates down in front of me. So that's what they looked like. Those red-covered certificates I'd never had in either life. I leaned back in my chair, composed, and looked straight at her. If you can speak to me politely, I said coolly, I'll offer you some tea. If not, don't blame me for being impolite. Claire froze, visibly shaken by the confidence and authority in my voice. Her anger faltered. She had done her homework the night before, digging into my current life. What she found terrified her. Her father's business now depended on my cooperation. I was the newly appointed president of the Canton Chamber of Commerce, a position soon to be officially announced. If the Hill family crossed me, their entire trade network would collapse. I picked up my phone in front of her and called my manager. Please take note, I said evenly. Cloud Tower will no longer serve anyone from the Hill family. Claire's face went pale, she stammered. I'm sorry, Miss Lynn. I shouldn't have lost my temper. I ignored her and gestured for the manager to escort her out. Later I heard what happened. Claire took out all her fury on Daniel. Humiliated and desperate, he tried to end it all, jumping from the roof of the Hill family villa, but he didn't have the courage to jump from high enough. He survived half paralyzed. The Hill family abandoned both him and Lily. I paid to have someone look after him, not out of kindness, but because I didn't want him to die too quickly. I wanted him to live and taste the slow, grinding bitterness of life he had once condemned me to. As for Lily, she's now under my sponsorship. I pay for her schooling, her clothes, her future. But when she turns 18, our connection will finally end for good.